saying going live. Well, we're live. Okay, it's coming through. Great.
Exciting.
Hello, everyone. This is another experiment in technological sharing Shakespeare. This is the second sharing Shakespeare session that we've done for Shakespeare Link. And tonight we have the amazing director, Blanche McIntyre, to do a Q&A with us for the next hour. I need to, I'm getting a feedback. How do I pause that?
Oh.
There we are. Okay. Always a technological hiccup. But yeah, so my name is Jim Wilkes. I'm from the Wet Mariners, who come and do the Willow every year. And this is Blanche McIntyre, director extraordinaire, who I first worked with in 2014 at the Globe Theatre doing Comedy of Errors. And I've since worked with her as well at the RSC doing Two Noble Kinsmen. She's directed As You Like It at the Globe. She's also done Titus Andronicus at the RSC, and pre-pandemic was preparing for Pericles, which we shall see.
It's tragically on pause for the moment.
Which is on pause because of the obvious circumstance in the world. But welcome, Blanche McIntyre.
This is lovely. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. I'm sure everyone here is very excited to see you. So we're just going to have a chat, and if you want to write any questions in the comments section on YouTube, by all means send stuff over and we'll try and answer everything. But yeah, so
there are some for you already, aren't there?
We've had some sent over. We've got enough to get through, I think, get started. But to start off, I want to talk about outdoor Shakespeare.
Yep.
Because those who know the Willow Globe will know it's very much outdoors and subject to all sorts of sheep noises, wildlife, birds, kites, rain, all sorts of things. And you've done the Globe Theatre, you've also done the RSC. So you've got the outdoor theatre and you've got indoor sitting in the dark theatre. So I wonder if we can start talking about the differences and what happens to the plays in those different environments.
Of course. I mean, I think the thing about the outdoor theatre is that the actors have much less help. They have more barriers, as you say, sheep noises, rain, clouds, thunder, aeroplane fly past, and indoors you can mute most of that, and so it's much easier to get other elements of the production to do some heavy lifting for you. So you can have your dramatic lighting effect, you can have your terrifying sound, you can plunge the audience into darkness if you want to, like a wonderful Cymbeline I saw years ago, complete blackout. At the Globe, or in fact, I cut my teeth assisting a touring outdoor Shakespeare, which would go around Kent every summer. It's only the acting that you get. There's some music, there's a little bit of help, but basically it's down to the actor and their ability to tell the story and to cut through. And what I discovered, or what we discovered, was that it wasn't so much about, I don't know if this has been your experience, Jamie, it wasn't about big, bold, crude choices. It wasn't about that at all, but it was very much about the clearer you were, the more the audience would come with you. And that could be gigantic and bold. It wasn't about dumbing down. It could be extremely complex, but you had to be absolutely sure in what you were doing and rooted in it. And then you could be as experimental as you liked, because you could bring the audience along.
Oh yeah. And so when you're directing and approaching a play, so you've got the script, and you've let's say you've been given the script for A Midsummer Night's Dream, and what would the differences be in your kind of approach from that kind of commission to doing it in the Globe or doing it in the RSC? Would it be a vastly different process from the off?
I don't think it would be vastly different, because the play, the way that I approach a play is always what's in it and how can I bring out what is in it to the best of my ability with the actors that I have in the place that I am. But I guess if it was A Midsummer Night's Dream, for example, the temptation is always to use, well, it's just like I said before, to use it to make the magic with the sound, to make the magic is the famous RSC Tempest that tried to go 3D projection to try and use those kind of tricks, all the tricks. And if it was an RSC which was going to be, oh God, if it was A Midsummer Night's Dream, which was going to be outdoors, you can't do that. So it has to be about the movement in the body of the actors, or using the surroundings, the place where you are. It's a very different language, and it's much more embodied in people.
Would you say that because it was written for a theatre like the Globe,
Mm-hmm.
which didn't have those, we talk about these tricks and these technological things which do the heavy lifting, are things excavated and uncovered in maybe that kind of barer outdoor setting where you can't hide, that you don't necessarily uncover in a sitting in the dark theatre indoors?
I don't know. I mean, I love it when you can't hide. I really love it, and I have a feeling that you love it too. But I remember with especially with something like Two Noble Kinsmen, you took a lot of your Globe techniques in performance, and you started interacting with the actors, with the audience, in a way that was much more traditional to the Globe, even though even though you were in a fully RSC supported environment.
Yeah, okay. Well, on that note, let's go for a question that we've had sent in. Let me just find. So this is, we're talking about the RSC and Two Noble Kinsmen. So this is from Crispin Jones. He says he saw Two Noble Kinsmen at the RSC 4 times and enjoyed the experience immensely. Jamie and James Corrigan climbing the metal grill around the stage was very intricate, impressive, and extremely risky, I imagine. It also managed to introduce great humour into the show and was very popular with audience members in the upper seats, as well as they became very engaged with the action. I would like to know how that particular idea developed, how difficult it was to act with that set, and how hard it was to stage that set. So, well, first off, for people who didn't see that production, can you give us a bit of a
yes, of course. The
description?
First of all, I'm thrilled that you saw Two Noble Kinsmen 4 times. It was one of the happiest experiences of my life working on that play. I loved it so much. And I'm assuming, I'm hoping, seeing it 4 times meant that you enjoyed it as well. The design was, when I spoke to the designer, we met in the middle, because I said, I think this play is about, it is on the one hand about how many different kinds of love there can be in the world, and they could be sexual or non-sexual, they could be gay or straight or bisexual, they could be, there's a sort of a rainbow spectrum of ways in which people can love each other, and the characters in the play love each other. And you set that against, thank you, my love, and you set that against a kind of reductive culture in which the men are expected to chase the women are expected not to have any desires of their own. And this is no good for anyone. And when the 2 kinsmen in question try to do that, it makes them terribly unhappy, and nobody wins, and the end is unrewarding for everyone. And I said all this to the designer. I sort of splurged this to the designer, and she said, "Well, I think it's about violence." I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, we're gonna have to find a middle ground here." And so what we ended up with was something about the kind of, because it was set in ancient Athens, we looked at the way that male culture, Athenian male culture, is very sexist and very sort of body focused and sport focused, and gymnasiums in which they used to exercise were very kind of I was going to say peacocky, can't think of a better word, and so we put together an arena, but we also wanted to suggest that the way that these young men are interacting with the world is not helping them, is imprisoning them. And so we had sorry, this is becoming a very long answer.
No, it's fine. Long answers are good.
Long answers are good. And so we had these 6 a sort of a deep stage with a little kind of low mud wall around it, and a huge entrance tunnel that you could come up. So it was like coming up into a big modern day arena. And then on top of this low wall, these 6 big iron grills that could fly up and down, and they'd come in with a huge rattle, and then you'd have a prison. Or they could go right up into the sky, and then you'd lose them. And of course, this helped also because the part of the start of this. Oh,
actually got a picture.
I've lost you. Oh my God, there you go.
There we are. So for those, there's an actual
the
production
arena.
photo from the RSC. So that's what you're describing now. That's me
That's
and James Corrigan.
you and James Corrigan. I was thinking you either played Dromios or you play cousins when we work together. You always have some kind of twin-like relationship.
Yeah.
And so yes, the story really kicks off when the 2 young men are in a prison and they see this young woman who happens in fact to be gay, but they don't know that. They never speak to her, and they fall out chasing her in romantic pursuit of her. And so these cages were incredibly useful for that. They were useful symbolically. We could climb on them, and there was a huge fight, in which the 2 actors, in which Jamie and James Corrigan threw each other against them. Sorry, this is now a spiel, and so yeah, it was tricky because we didn't have them in the rehearsal room, and I think Jamie could probably speak to this more than me. We had one kind of big sheet that we were pretending was all 6 and that we'd move around and we could climb up and down on. But a lot of the work had to be done when we got onto the set, which was about 3 days before the audience saw it for the first time. So there was a very quick getting used to it, and all kinds of technical problems. They made a tremendous rattle as they came in. They couldn't come in fast. All of these sudden difficulties that we had to solve very, very fast. And as I remember it, but again, you could probably correct me, I had to be the person on the other end saying, you can't stand on the top. You can't, it's not safe. You can't do that. You can't jump, you have to have your feet and hands on it at all times. You can't hang off it. Because of course, Jamie and Jamie Wilkes and James Corrigan were so both sort of confidently experimental and also fearless that they would be doing all this terribly dangerous stuff, and I would be losing sleep and weeping and begging them to be more boring as actors, which of course they never were.
Well, I think because it was the rehearsal for that was quite interesting because we couldn't really grasp it in the rehearsal room at all. It was only when we got the set and it was like, oh, this is what this is. And I remember being like quite skeptical, and we tried all different versions of the jail things going on, like being in boxes, being tied up.
Yeah.
And then as soon as we had the actual cell bars, which is actually a real offer to an actor, because we were above the audience. We could reach the balcony. We could reach the people in the upper seats, like Crispin was saying.
Yes, you made friends with a whole circle, didn't you? When you were downstage, you could engage a whole series of people who were on the front, who were in the circle. Yeah,
so for those of you who haven't been in the Swan stage, it's actually very similar to an indoor Globe theatre where there is the groundling kind of stalls, and then you have a second tier, then a top tier, and so these bars actually reached that second tier, and we could chat to them and kind of actually interact and do asides with them in quite a lovely way, and like Crispin was saying, actually access audience members who wouldn't normally be accessed.
This is one of the things I find very difficult about theatres which are high like that you can be close to the action but feel like you're not in it. And so one of the things that I found that really exciting, because the expensive seats always get some interaction and they always feel close. But to involve the whole theatre, I think, is something that everyone should be wanting to do.
Yeah, oh, completely. Yeah. And whilst we're talking about Two Neville Kinsmen, we've got another question. Related to that, but a bit broader, which is does approaching less presented Shakespeare plays offer any particular joys or challenges?
For me, I would enormously much rather do a less presented Shakespeare play than a more presented Shakespeare play. And I think if you're doing Midsummer Night's Dream, and I know that some people, Hello. No. I was just going to say that was Theseus going past.
That's Jerry Sarasi.
That's Jerry Sarasi who played Theseus in Two Noble Kinsmen. So this is a very kinsman space. I've lost my thread. Yes, that something like Romeo and Juliet. I did it for GCSE. I've probably seen 35 productions. I haven't seen 35 productions of it. I've probably seen 10 productions of it. I could say the lines along. And so a director is going to have to be so insightful and so new and innovative and do something so interesting. The bar is so high that the pressure is intense. And so if somebody offered Romeo and Juliet or a play or Midsummer Night's Dream or Hamlet or Twelfth Night or any of those plays which are beloved and canonical and done a lot, it would be terrifying. With the Two Noble Kinsmen, you can do what the play is because you don't first have to break through all the layers of what people think it is or how it's been done over the past or what people are expecting. You can just go to what's in the language and present that to the best of your ability. So it's much, much, much more enjoyable.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. Because you did Two Noble Kinsmen and then you did As You Like It?
Yes. And I did As You Like It first. I did Kinsman second. But I did Winter's Tale last year. I get the early ones and the late ones. I don't get the middle ones.
So when you go from a really a tricky one of the problem plays that people like to say, but actually that's up for debate. But when you go from that to say something like As You Like It or the Winter's Tale, which you also did at the Globe, the ones which are a bit more ironed out nicely. There's less creases on.
Well, I wouldn't say that about Winter's Tale. I really wouldn't. I mean, but you know this about late Shakespeare language, that a lot of the time it's intentionally difficult because somebody's working through a problem and they're not always being articulate and they can't always express what they want as well as they'd like, but they're doing it in verse. And so you can look at a page and find that there are some lines of Leontis's where I thought, oh God, I don't know what this is. And I looked at the notes and it said, notorious crux. And I thought, oh God, well, we'll just have to muddle on through. But they are, As You Like It, I think As You Like It is incredibly difficult. I think people don't realise what a difficult play it is. Because Act 1 is easy. Quick, get out of the court before he kills us. There's a tyrant. We're in danger. We've got to run. That's fine. Acts 2, 3, 4, most of 5. There's no plot. You can't arrange to meet anyone until very late. People bump into each other. People have discussions. Nothing moves. They're in the forest. They can't advance anything. And so it's like Waiting for Godot, but Elizabethan and Shakespearean. And in Act 5, it's as though he's, just in case you thought that I cared about plot, it's all fine. He met a holy man, it's fine. Don't worry about that. And so you have these people who want the play to roll forward because, of course, that's how you assume drama works. And then you have everyone on stage sitting about. There's a huge mismatch between what the play is doing and what expectations lead you to think it's doing, and getting across the sort of Samuel Beckettness of it without making the audience feel shortchanged is really hard. Yeah, I don't think I got it right.
That's in what way? What would you do differently?
I think.
And this is for As You Like It, which you did at the Globe in
2015. I slightly tripped myself up because I did it in Elizabethan Dress. And one of the things that I really wanted to do, but it's hard at the Globe, but I didn't quite go far enough, is that I wanted to start it with the actors very trapped, so that when the trappings go, there's suddenly nothing. And so you're away. You go, oh, I see. We were all in these prison-like clothes. We were in these tiny spaces, and suddenly we're in this open space and we don't quite know what to do with ourselves, and the way of moving changes, the way people talk to each other changes, and the way they dress changes, and the atmosphere completely changes. But I ended up doing, and the designer was lovely and he did it beautifully, a bunch of not very clear heraldic flags and then some ordinary Elizabethan clothes, which went into some more ordinary Elizabethan clothes. And he was very. It was my fault. But I did think, in another time, I should do it. It should be 1799 to 1800. It should be, the French Revolution going to those. This is a bit of an oxbow lake, but the way that clothing, for example, changed from these very structured high wigs, corsets, everything readable, everything decipherable. And then suddenly in about 1800, 1805, people started dressing as though they were toddlers. And suddenly it was loose, it was unstructured. There was no sex, there was no, everyone was in a big nightie. And that seems to me, the politics that went with that and what that was showing visually seemed to me to be a useful map for what's going on in the play, quite apart from the problem of nothing happening in the play, which I still don't know how to solve. But I didn't do it.
Right.
Next time.
Another question we've got, how far do you allow actors to influence your vision of a play?
I love it when actors influence my vision of a play, and I can ask Jamie Wilkes to tell an anecdote here.
Which
because
one?
Any on the first week of Comedy of Errors, and it was my first Shakespeare, and I was terrified. It was also a farce. It was the biggest stage I'd done. I knew I had to make it funny, and I thought I don't have enough ideas for this, and so we spent the first week of rehearsal with 8 baskets of random props. And I said, we're going to walk through the play, use anything you like, do it any way you like, bring whatever you feel like, using into the scene. And it was partly to generate a sort of bank of jokes that we could then use, but also to give the actors the idea that that we were all making it together, and that it would be very welcome if people generated their own material, because who doesn't want to have 15 people generating material instead of one? And on the Friday of the first week, I had a half day solo with Jamie, and said, we need a silent movie type beginning to this play, because people come in, they're not tuned to the language. It's often quite a shock to start a Shakespeare play. You need to get people into the mode of watching theatre before the language hits them. And so what would be lovely is to put together some sort of sequence that they can watch while and that sort of translates them into the world of the play. And Jamie went away and watched a lot of Buster Keaton, as I remember, and came up with a purely self-generated comedy sequence about trying to get some washing down, and there's a pair of pants stuck at the top of the globe. He can't get it down. He uses a small pole, he uses a longer pole, he climbs a ladder, he swings from a rope, he does this, he does this, he does that. And it doesn't work, and eventually it falls down in an earthquake in Act 4. And as I remember, we talked about some mopping the floor. We thought that might be unsafe, but once we decided together on hanging up and unhanging of washing, you created the whole thing yourself, Jamie.
Well, because I remember being called in for that solo, thinking, because it was one of my first big roles, certainly first big Shakespeare role, first role at the Globe, where I'd done Titus Andronicus earlier in that season, and thinking, it's because I'm not getting it right. And then when you turned around and said, we want you to do a dumb show, at the beginning, it's like, oh wow. And just 10 minutes to play on the Globe stage, and actually for you to have kind of the lack of ego as a director to permit an actor to have that much agency in the creation of the production, it's very rare, which is such a gift for an actor. And it was so fun where we asked for various props, and I mean there were moments during that rehearsal process where we were like, can we get a rubber octopus?
And they said, we'll make it, but you have to use it.
I've still got one of the tentacles from that octopus. So and that was the rehearsal process. It was actors throwing stuff up, and because there wasn't an ego about any of the ideas from you, from the designers, from the fight choreographers, from the actors. It meant that every idea was tried and honored, and we very quickly knew as a team what was working and what wasn't working, and so we kind of had this lovely quality control. That was
I mean, the joy of it also was that company was so generous, and everyone would, because if it's a comedy like that, you need people to be taking care of each other. You can't have, it's just to speak technically, you need somebody to tee up the joke for the next person to come and land the punchline. You can't have selfish people saying, no, the gags are mine, the gags are mine. And so it was very much it was made as a group, and then it was performed as a group, and that was totally delightful. But for me, I love it when people come up with things, and I love it when people add to the play, because when the audience is watching it, they don't know who came up with the idea. If it's a good idea, it reflects well on me, it reflects well on the company. It's so much more enjoyable, because if you can say to somebody, this sequence, this idea, this characterization, this is great, let's put it in the play, it's then a shining bit of the play for the rest of the run. That actor, I don't think, will never then phone it in, because they made it and it's theirs, and they have it for the rest of the show. So it's not really altruistic. It's just I don't understand why other people don't always do it, because it seems to me to be quite a sneaky way of getting a company to do wonderful work.
And thinking back to Shakespeare's company, so you're a director, and these plays were written in a very different kind of theatre making culture, where the director role didn't quite exist in a formal capacity. And so I'm wondering, how do you view your role in relation to Shakespeare, and what these plays are asking of a role of a director, what they need of a director, and whether actors have a very different process now to when maybe Richard Burbage and his company were putting these plays on for the first time?
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. I mean, the first director that was he was 19th century, wasn't he?
As in the first separate role.
First, as a separate role. I say that now. I worry, but I think it was centuries after Shakespeare for sure. But I guess, I mean, you probably with Belt Up had a reasonably similar kind of way of approaching plays like this, but I think it would be very, very hard to recreate what was going on in that company. That you had a permanent company playing 6 different shows in a week, with an afternoon to rehearse each, or morning to rehearse each one before the afternoon of playing it. They would keep maybe 300 plays in their head. So there was you can't direct in that environment in the way that a person understands directing, because as soon as you stop and go, but what is this about? You're wasting everybody's time. Yeah. You don't have that kind of time. But what you do have is a group of actors who are so exercised in verse and how to speak it and what it means and how it's built, that you can give them just a morning. I'm assuming you can give them a morning and they go, from the rhythm here, I know what this asks of me. From, this is a soliloquy, I know what this will need, because I've done it 40 times already, and I've done another 200 similar soliloquies. So my experience tells me how to do it. I would love to have a company to work with a company which was that permanent, and that, I mean, probably Weekly Rep is the closest that we ever got. And I imagine that similar muscles were used, but certainly in terms of sitting down, pulling apart, what's the character like, what might this situation be, you simply couldn't do it. And so now I guess you do have actors who, I think one of my main jobs is trying to take away the fear. I mean, you are not I don't think of you as a person who is intimidated by Shakespeare. I know that we've done verse workshops in which you have been more erudite here than me. But I know that there are a lot of actors out there who come in and go, I'm not going to get it. I don't understand it. It's not for me. For whatever reason, I find a block in how I speak it. And a lot of my job, I think, is to help people over that. Because, of course, it wasn't written. Occasionally it was written to be difficult, but a lot of the time it wasn't. And to help people approach all aspects of it. And I suppose people are, you have to translate it to a certain extent. I mean, I'd love, as a man with enormous global experience, I'd love to know your take on this, but I think we no longer have an Elizabethan audience who would be, happily wandering off for an act or two, turning up late, having a pie in the middle. It's a very different, very much more informal approach to it, but who would never, I don't think, expect to suspend their disbelief, and who would be watching feats of acting on a bare stage in, some aristocrats' cast-offs, and that the riches would be part of it, the scenery would not be part of it. That the audiences today come with a whole different set of expectations about what a play is and how they want to respond to it. And I guess part of my job is to nudge it in the way that it's from the bare bones into something that isn't going to be, that is going to speak to audiences as well. That's not going to be unpalatable because it's too austere or too much with its feet in Shakespeare's time to step into ours.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing where, because in thinking about the rehearsal room that you run, and kind of also thinking about an Elizabethan Jacobean process and this idea of authorship, and when we think about Shakespeare, we think about a solo author. And oftentimes when we think about a director, they are the author of a production. And we've actually got some questions about that. Well, there's one that's actually for me saying, do you prefer a director with a firm vision of how they want the play to be, or a director who gives little direction and leaves it to the actor to find their way?
Oh, Jamie, I'm going to sit back and enjoy hearing you answer this.
Well, I was going to turn it around and say a sneaky thing. Blanche is one of my favourite directors I've ever worked with.
Jamie's one of my favourite actors I've ever worked with.
Stop it, this is disgusting.
It's true.
And as I'm sure we've kind of expressed so far, that actually you do allow actors to have a lot of agency and authorship over the production. That's not to say you don't have a vision. But every actor enjoys actually having that ownership. And like you said before, when we then go to do it 30 performances later, we've still got that fresh ownership, which allows us to kind of keep going with a bit of soul.
It's yours. I completely agree. I think one of the mistakes that directors make is that they think it's theirs, but it's absolutely not. It's midwifed by the director, from the writer to the actors, and then from the actors to the audience. And so it's got to be yours. I head out after press night and you own it. And so if you're, standing there going, I don't know why I'm saying it like this, but X badgered me into doing it, then that's not going to make for you being happy. Or, that's not going to be a good moment in the show.
Yeah, and I think audiences sometimes don't appreciate the difference maybe between a company on press night and then 6 months down the line. They can be very different shows.
They really
they evolve.
They do, yeah. I mean, they are physically different shows as well.
There's a question kind of that goes on from that, which I think is actually really interesting, and something that maybe we don't think about much in terms of from an insider's point of view, but from an outsider, there's the question: what ratio of an actor's performance is the actor, and how much is the director?
Oh, God.
So again, it's
That's
about authorship,
hard.
isn't it? It's,
I mean, I don't know if this is going to answer it, and I also suspect Jamie may have heard this before, so he may have to arrange his face into a surprised look. my mum and dad were both editors, publishers, but they would edit the author's work. And I tend to see my job very much like that the character is created by the actor, because they've got to be the actors using their mind, body, spirit, soul, what they ate for lunch, what the argument they had at the weekend. What I'm doing is going, this choice works, this choice works, this choice works. Go with this, tweak it to that, possibly try this, try that. But it's all made by the actor. And I'm trying to steer the actor so that the thing the actor is making is coming into line with what all the other actors are making and what the play is asking. So I think it's 100% the actor, but the actor is capable of tens of millions of different choices, any of which might be right, any of which might work. And so it's a narrowing down of what the actor is doing to 3 or 4 possibilities, rather than a director trying to create a whole new thing and stick it on the actor. Because, you know, it's not me on stage. It's you making it yourself.
Yeah. Is there a scientific ratio?
Is there a scientific ratio? 100% actor. Yeah, 100% actor within a frame which the director is trying to tweak.
What were you going to apologise for?
I was going to apologise. I was going to apologise to anyone who found me too fast at the beginning, because I was quite nervous and I feel like I've slowed down a little bit.
No.
Sorry if I was hard to follow.
It's very weird technology, but it's very fun. I was going to ask you, what was I going to ask you? I was going to ask you something, but I forgot it. Maybe it will come back to me. It was something to do with... so you put a lot of trust in actors.
Yes.
Is there, if you were if an actor asks you, what are the things that I as an actor need to be thinking about as a sort of inner director? What are the questions I need to be asking about a process and how to create a performance? What would be some good tips for you to give to an actor? Does that make sense?
Say it to me again. So if an actor is trying to give themselves tips for how to make a better performance.
I don't know if this is an interesting question. Well, I'll formulate it in my head. I've got another question.
Okay.
So you did a lot of kind of, you got a lot of experience before you went solo as a director, doing a lot of assisting. And your style, I'd say, is quite rare in terms of the autonomy you give over to your company. Is there, without naming any names, are there any things that you observed other directors doing which you thought, no, that obviously doesn't work, that's not how you direct, you can see what that's doing to an actor? Are there any things that stick in your mind of that kind of formed how you direct today?
Oh, there totally are. I assisted a director who's a lovely guy and a very good friend of mine, so I won't name him. But his background was acting, which most brilliant directors are actors first. But he had difficulty articulating what it was he thought the moment was, or what it was he wanted the actor to try. So he couldn't tell them how to try it. He could only show them how to do it. And because he's a comedic genius, it was always wonderful. And it would always leave the actor at a total loss. How can I do this? He's just done it brilliantly, but he's him. I'm not going to be funny if I do it like that. And of course, they would then try it and there would be no joy in it. And the timing would be off. And so there's a lot, I think, most of the time where I've sat in the corner going, don't do that. It's been because somebody has tried to put themselves in the actor's role rather than helping the actor. They've tried to act it themselves or say it themselves or give a line reading, which is obviously a huge taboo. And they take ownership away from the actor by doing that. They just show the actor how good they are, and they don't help the actor at all.
Right. Yeah. I think I've reformulated my question about so you giving a lot of ownership to your actors, Are there any sort of common blocks that you observe within actors that kind of get in the way of their performances, that you know as a director you need to unpick that before they really start to fly in that role?
Yes, there really are, and that's a really good question. There are a lot of common blocks. I think every actor gets blocked at some point along the journey. I think a block is part of the journey of going from the script to the performance, and it might be a mega block or a tiny thing, but it's very, very rare that you have somebody who goes, "This is wonderful, and I'm going to be great," from read through to to press night. A lot of it is, apart from with Shakespeare, a lot of it is a block around the language. I don't understand it. I can't remember the exact. There was an actor who was terribly worried that she was going to say she had, I know fripperies was her word, and she was terribly worried she was going to say flatulence or something like. I can't remember what the two words were, but she gave herself an absolute complex about it, and it was to do with feeling like these difficult words didn't live in her mouth. And with that, it's just about spending lots of time working on the text, trying to make it feel safe, trying to make it owned. There are, I mean, I don't know if this is your experience. I've found a lot more with younger actors than with older actors that they tend to come up and say, "Tell me what to do," and I don't want to tell you what to do. I want us to find some things to do together. And one actor that I remember years ago, and I'd only just started, and I didn't realize that he was unhappy, who came 2 weeks into performance and said, I'm desperately unhappy. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm absolutely wretched. I was going, "I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I wish you'd told me. We could have fixed it."
Yeah.
But there is a block of not feeling like you can speak to the director, feeling not connected to the character, but feeling like you can't, like you're not allowed to say it. But that's, I think, is a younger actor thing. I don't have the right to have a problem. I've sometimes found, and I need to be careful here because one of my experiences with this was quite recent, that there are actors who love to be liked, and if they are playing bastards, it can be really hard because they're doing something which their whole life training has been geared against. And so I think that is an example, I think, of a block that you can only get through with about 20 years of a really good therapist, because whatever it is that's causing the block comes from a set of rules laid down for the actor in life, and not which are bleeding into the rehearsal room and causing difficulties with the character because the wall is too permeable between the actor and the character, and they're feeling as though if they act in some outrageously dislikable way, then some internal taboo has been disrespected. Are these enough? Are these?
No, these are brilliant. Yeah,
enough blocks.
Amazing. We've got some questions coming in thick and fast now. We've got a question from Angus, who has asked, why is Shakespeare so serious and dull at school, and yet every show we have seen live is so fun and current?
Oh, Angus, that's a brilliant question. I was so bored. I shouldn't say this. My personal thought is that people are taught to treat it as a literary text, and it's not. It's like a musical score. If you sat down and read a musical score going, "Oh, how interesting, look, a high note," you'd be bored out of your skull. And that is often, I know that there are a lot of teachers who are wonderful, but there can be a way of doing it which is all about the imagery, the words, the irony, the themes, and not these things as they are experienced in the moment, in the rush of the moment, with other people. And so I guess it can become dry because it goes from the bloodstream up into the head. And I'm quite a cerebral director myself. I quite like to be up in the head, but if you live entirely up there, then it's a desiccating experience. It's horrible. And the only thing I can advise is that people act them out as much as possible in the class.
Yeah, completely.
completely.
as soon as they become set texts. Because they were actually introduced in Victorian times because everyone was so bored of Latin and doing Seneca and stuff like that. And
understandable.
They was like, well, everyone loves Shakespeare. Let's teach them Shakespeare. Sort of the equivalent of the teacher putting on a Tarantino movie.
But then, do you think it's just by being in a classroom that sucks the joy out of it? And the second that you say this is a really important thing, and you're not allowed to say you're bored, because this is good writing.
Yeah.
Then you're taking the pleasure out of it for everyone.
And there are amazing teachers at Shakespeare.
There are.
And I definitely, when I was at school, had a phenomenal teacher who cast me as Prospero, and that gave me the joy of actually it coming to life. And when people only encounter it as something that you can get right or wrong and get 25 marks writing about, that's very different to sitting in a theatre and experiencing it that way.
So much. And I think you're right about the right and wrong thing. And my understanding now is that the essay has to cover these 10 points or you don't get the marks. And then it's an exercise in hoop jumping and remembering. And it's nothing about your own personal response to what you're seeing in front of you. Yeah.
And Angus actually goes on. He says, what's the difference from the text to a show that spices it up? Well, that's interesting. Okay, so what are the differences from the text? Okay, so let's talk about your process. So you have a text, which to lots of people would be very intimidating, or it might have lots of ghosts, like you're saying about Romeo and Juliet earlier. What in a show spices it up and lifts it off the page?
Oh, well, this is going to sound a bit obvious, but the acting and the people watching, and it's. I mean, I know that you can probably speak to this better than me, but if you have a company and they switch about, and you suddenly see what a new person brings, and it may be, everybody equally brilliant, but everyone bringing their own personal take, suddenly there is something exciting about that, because what you're seeing is the match of the DNA of the person with the script. And there is some fizz in that. And again, you could probably speak to this more eloquently than me, but you, I'm sure, will have done shows with a wonderful audience that has lifted the show, that has lifted the performance, and the actors feel like they're walking on air. And equally, you will have done a show with a performance where the audience sit back and go, all right, then entertain me. And you have to work harder. And though you may do just as brilliant acting, playing, all of it, you're having to go through the gears a bit more. That because it's unique, because every night it genuinely is different depending on who turns up, and because every actor in a part is different from any other actor in that same part, you really are making something in that night which will never be made again. And I guess that's where the excitement comes, or at least it does for me.
Yeah, that's when an actor says it's been a good show, I think it's always means it's felt spontaneous, and I think that's what audiences feed off. Where a text is a record of something that's happened already, where a good performance, you're watching it happen in front of you, and it feels like the first time. And that's why audiences love things going wrong, or they love a director going on with the book, or an understudy going on, because it's like, that's something real's just happened now.
Yeah. No, I think that's completely right. And of course, audiences contribute to it as well. If an audience is vocal, then the actors will be completely different.
Yeah. We have another question. What is the story of how Blanche became such an infectious enthusiast for Shakespeare? So what is the story from the beginning?
From the beginning.
Well, I'll help you along. What was the first Shakespeare you saw live?
The first Shakespeare I saw live is not very helpful because it was Peter Hall's 12th Night and I was 6.
With Donald Sinder then?
Very, very possibly. It would have been 1987.
1987.
So I'm
sure someone on the chat will
someone will know,
fill us in.
Someone will know.
1987, Peter Hall, Twelfth Night.
But I was too excited. My mum and dad had driven us up and sort of, told us the story, showed us the pictures and translated what it was going to be. And my little sister and I were going, just back off, it'll be fine. And so most of my experience there was going, I got it, rather than, having an artistic experience. I think, and you were making me think about school when you were talking about schools and about studying, that we had been doing. Am I allowed, can I say the name of the Scottish play? Is anyone worried about that?
We're on the internet. We're not in a theatre.
We're not a theatre. I was doing Macbeth for GCSE, and having sort of ploughed through, darkness and light, the themes, fate, the theme. Eventually, the teacher ran out of ideas and said, "All right, let's read a scene." And they gave me the Banquo scene just before the murder, where they show up and it's the dark and they're both a bit suspicious. And it suddenly came to life for me. And I thought, I'm just enjoying this so much, reading this out, getting into the character, sort of feeling what this guy is like, even though I'm a 15-year-old girl in an all-girls school. And that felt suddenly very exciting. And I wonder whether there is something for people who, this is just speaking for myself, people who are not actors or who haven't been actors, who suddenly are given the chance to do it. The joy of acting is it is so infectious. It's so wonderful. And there really is nothing like the pleasure of being on stage saying words. There really is nothing. And I think it probably came from there. But I haven't thought about that in 20 years.
Yeah. Well, I think something that keeps coming up is this idea of ownership. And I think a theme throughout kind of all of your answers so far and your process, and actually when people feel ownership, it's almost like a permission that Shakespeare is for them. And that's certainly something that's very big with Shakespeare Link, Have a Go Shakespeare, and this whole project of sharing Shakespeare is actually telling everyone that this is for you as well. It's not just for people who speak a certain way, who have a certain amount of education, certain class. It is so human. And when anyone feels that ownership, that's when they get this amazing box of treats.
Yeah.
So would you say that was your moment where you felt permission to?
Yeah. I think that's a lovely way of putting it. I really do, and I think it's something to do with the fact that Shakespeare is written for actors without a director. That it's all there for the actor, because there is no time for somebody from the outside to unpick it and tell you, sort of try this, try that. That it's got to be it's got to be drivable by a group of people without outside interference, and so it's all packed in the script. And so the more you unpack, the more you find, because he didn't trust, or there was no setup whereby you could trust somebody else to come in and stroke their chin and explain it to the ordinary people. It had to be in the script.
Yeah, completely. So we've got a few more minutes, and maybe a question about. So you've directed. You said earlier you've directed some of the very early plays and some of the very late plays, and have you noticed an evolution within Shakespeare himself between those two ends? Hugely.
Just in terms of it's a language thing. I was going to say the late plays the Winter's Tale and Pericles, they have this extraordinary resolution at the end, where it's impossible. It shouldn't happen, but somehow this gift is given to a human being, and that dissolves people, because an act of, I think Christians say grace, and I think it feels like grace. The undeserved kindness is intensely moving. And I find that very moving. And I was going to say that, this is the things I find more, but then of course, Comedy of Errors, that was exactly what it was. It was 4 acts of mayhem, and then a family is reunited where it was impossible. So that isn't an evolution, but I guess I had an extraordinary time going from Two Noble Kinsmen to Titus Andronicus, going back in time, because Kinsman, and I know I've said it already, but it's very much language is Picasso, language is modern art. I use this language to approximate what I would love to communicate to you if only communication were possible. It isn't really. Here are some overlapping images that sort of add up to what I'd love to say if I could. And the three queens scene at the beginning is a very good example of that. My tears are like ice and I'll melt my heart, but I'll drown. There's something to do with a fish pond. I'm making this up now. You go back to Titus Andronicus, and it's like an engine piston. It's so simple. You don't have to translate it. Every line is modern English. It's so basic. It's so plain. The rhythm is, bangs along with almost no sophistication at all. And that's partly to do with, what the play is. But you absolutely get a sense of Shakespeare moving from learning what rhythm is and what character is, and how a person and a line can meet and interact, or a person and an iambic rhythm can meet and interact, while he's still having to sort of knock corners off it, and then mastering it and all kinds of extraordinary internal possibilities coming out, and then getting so much the master of it that he starts to experiment with, what if I don't communicate? What if I am not articulate? What if like Leontes, what if these thoughts implode as I'm having them? They're not really thoughts, but I still have to speak what comes out then. And so I do feel like there's an evolution, but it's an evolution in terms of speech and what it is there to do and what it does.
And do you think, to kind of bring back that ratio question, how much is that to do with what maybe Burbage learns as much as what Shakespeare learns? So you've got Burbage playing Titus, and then a few decades later playing Leontes. What do you think there's something that's happened there, and what Burbage is capable of, or what the collaboration?
Entirely, because you're writing. I mean, this is the joy for Shakespeare. It must have been writing for a specific actor. I know you can do this in your sleep, but what if I pushed you to do that? And then Burbage discovers all these other things, which then inspire Shakespeare, which then inspire Burbage, I think you see it, for example, and this is a different kind of example, in the way that Shakespeare's writing changes for the two boy players who played in Midsummer Night's Dream, Hermia and Helena, and who then moved to play Rosalind and Celia. And they're the same because of the height difference and the jokes about who's fair, who's dark. They're obviously a double act. But what he writes for Hermia compared to what he writes for Rosalind is a different league. I mean, Rosalind is a different league. So I'm sure it's to do with what the actor is finding in themselves, which then inspires Shakespeare as well. I mean, you wouldn't write that stuff if you didn't think somebody couldn't say it.
Yeah.
And in fact, actually, you really see Celia is Hermia's pretty easy, Helena's pretty easy, Celia's pretty easy, Rosalind's not easy. So clearly Celia wasn't developing in the same way that Rosalind was developing.
Yeah.
Because the language for her is not so demanding.
Yeah. We've got a question here. Last few questions now, but is there a play you are desperate to direct, and why?
Pericles.
Oh, yeah. Is that because of a global pandemic? Is that why?
Actually, I'll tell you something about Pericles. There is a lovely scene where his wife dies in childbirth, and the sailors say we have to throw her overboard. And they put her in a coffin with a note and all this other stuff, and they throw her overboard. And she washes up, and she's brought into the house of a doctor who says, "She's not dead. I can revive her." And that feels to me like the sort of thing that a kind of healing gesture, which I want to be shown to people. And I know it's been, it's a drop in the ocean of the trauma that everyone is suffering at the moment. But it's when unexpectedly something, that's what I was saying before, when unexpectedly something is given back, it feels extraordinary. There are lots of plays I'd like to direct. There are all kinds of plays I'd love to direct. I had a terrible time, not a terrible time. I saw Mark Rylance's 12th Night, and it was so good. I don't think I can ever direct that, but I'd love to. It's, you know, that thing where you think, I'd just be copying what he did.
Yeah.
It was perfect. I'd love to do Coriolanus. I'd love to do Troilus and Cressida. I'd love to do Troilus and Cressida. I think I know how to do that. And like, you know,
you do lean towards the classical. You are a classicist.
I am a classicist. But this is the thing. I don't think the Troilus and Cressida is a classical play, and I think this is the mistake people make. It's nicked from Chaucer. It's a courtly love play.
Right.
And I thought it was fascinating and nearly brilliant. There was one at the Globe in about 2008, possibly. And the Trojans were the whole first half was sweeping about in their lovely purple gowns with their gold and their this and their that, the wafting and the incense. And you're going, this is Disney. This is too sweet. I don't like this. This is too cute. And then it broke apart. And then you understood why it had to break apart, because it was essentially fake. All this, oh, my sleeve, oh, my, you know, let's look at all these people with their shields. Oh, how marvelous. Oh, look, it's all gold and silver and ermine. That wasn't telling the truth about what life was like. And so the scab had to come off. So I would love to do a medieval version with all the wimples and the child.
Right, yeah.
and mess that up, put that in the mud.
Yeah. We've got to wrap up now, but I've got one last question.
Jamie, but this has been so much fun.
I'm really enjoying myself.
Me too.
There's I mean, this might prompt a massive discussion.
Oh God! I'll be quick.
A director said to me, but he got it from Terry Hands, who he'd assisted, about Shakespeare kind of enjoying treading the line between a sort of binary of church and tavern. And I was just wondering whether you as a director, do you ever find yourselves leaning towards the church end or the tavern end, and whether maybe the Globe is more of a taverny space and the RSC is a churchy space, and how do you tread that line between a sort of reverential and then the boisterous kind of bawdiness, the church and the tavern of Shakespeare?
That is such a good question. That's such a good question. Yeah, I mean, I worry that I feel like there's a bit of a false link suggesting that the RSC is the church and the Globe is the tavern. I don't know if that is necessarily right. I think that you can, it's possible that an indoor church, that an indoor space is more churchy because you can control the environment around you to a certain extent. Oh, I find this question really hard because I think that the things I associate with church and tavern are not quite what I find in Shakespeare.
Right.
But I think that this is because church, the word church, is sending me down, mentally speaking, to Shakespeare as a recusant family, what it is to be a believer in a time of enormous religious upheaval is essentially to tie yourself to one kind of structure or another kind of structure, with a different hierarchy, different set of people in charge. Is it the Queen? Is it the Pope? And I don't think that's what you're talking about. I think you're talking about something which is a sort of a higher purpose or a greater good, or some kind of moral structure, rather than sort of a social fitting on of principles to people.
I'd say it's the reverence of Shakespeare on a pedestal, which might be sort of like what Angus was saying about kind of the school version of like Shakespeare's this brilliant cultural icon, and then there's the one where it's irreverent, it's silly, it's chucking leeks at each other.
I mean, I'd love to say chucking leeks at each other, but you've got to have both, haven't you? If you chuck too many leeks, you miss the language, and if you miss the language, then there's no point you watching it, because the language is what cracks open what it is to be alive and what it is to be human. And that entirely includes, bum jokes and, jokes about sex and hitting each other with leeks. But I don't know if Shakespeare is ever as unmixed as that. I mean, you know, to take your examples, I'm just ducking your question, I know. To take your example with the leeks, that the business with the leeks and Fluellen in Henry V is funny, but it's funny in the context of something deeply brutal happening. And there's, you know, I've seen productions of Henry V in which Fluellen is a really unpleasant guy with a strong violent tendency. So to be, you know, to be shoving, am I getting this right? Am I on the wrong play?
No,
I am on the right play, aren't I? Henry V. I suddenly went, am I Mary Wise?
I think so.
Oh,
everyone at Shakespeare Link will know because they've
Panic.
done Mary Wives a few years ago.
Panic.
You're allowed to get things wrong.
Yes, but I suppose what I mean is you can have slapstick, but if you have slapstick in the context of a play about war, and you're having comedy, people being comedy beaten up, then it's not unmixed fun knockabout. It's not plain. It's not simple. And I remember that when we did the violence in Comedy Veras, that there was a huge difference between the slapstick in which nobody got hurt and the slapstick in which you did get hurt. And when you did get hurt, they couldn't stand it. The audience couldn't stand it. They suddenly went, "Oh, I'm not. That's not funny. I'm not laughing at that." So I guess you can't. I don't think you can separate them. I think you have to have both. And I think the trouble with Shakespeare is in a line it goes from one to the other. So you can't even go, you know, this speech is pure ethereal church. You have to go, this speech is a mixture of mud and something much greater.
And actually, I think some of the most powerful moments in Shakespeare are when he lulls the audience into thinking, oh, we're safely in the tavern, and then something will happen. So that there's that moment in Love's Labour's Lost where the message comes at the is it father or it was the first one we did at the Willow.
Yes,
but suddenly it goes from tavern to now we need to be grown up.
Yes, the king is dead.
Yeah,
and you have to go back home.
Yeah,
we've just been in the middle of the 9 worthies.
Yeah, and that duality that's always there, and that's human, isn't it? It's the presence of both at the same time.
I completely agree, and I think, I mean, you know, I don't think you can ever stand on a pedestal for too long. I think if you do that, then someone will knock you off, and I think that's the tension in Shakespeare.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I think we have to wrap up now because although we could go throughout the entire night.
Oh, totally good. This has been delightful. Thank you.
Yeah, this has been absolutely wonderful. So the whole point of this is to kind of, which nicely links up to what we've been discussing, this ownership and actually opening the doors and inviting people in who might feel that they don't have access or permission to Shakespeare, and opening those doors and saying this is for everyone and there is something here to still tell us. We just got people saying some lovely things. You were in the right play. It was Henry V. It's been a lovely treat.
It's been a treat for us. Well, it's certainly been a treat for me.
I'm a much more fun and clever Graham Norton, said Iris. I'll take that.
You are.
Yeah. So Blanche McIntyre, you're an amazing director, and it's been absolutely so wonderful to kind of have this chat and share this and kind of talk and connect in this crazy time.
Brilliant. Jamie Wilkes, you're a brilliant actor, and I can't wait to see you back on stage when this is all calmed down again. / work with you when
fingers crossed. So we're going to go off live now, but thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. I just need to work out how to stop this, but there'll be another Sharing Shakespeare very soon, and I'm sure it'll be announced what it's going to be. But this has been so fun, and I'm so glad that this project can work and we can continue it. But for now, that's all for this week. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
We're just ending. I've ended it. I think I've